Hello, and welcome to Cured, the remarkable science and stories of spontaneous healing and recovery. We're going to be talking tonight about the building blocks of health, our immune system, how diet, lifestyle, and stress can play its part, and how interconnected radical healing is combined with our thoughts, beliefs, and even our sense of self. We're going to be talking to Dr. Jeff Rediger, who is with us from Harvard, where he's an instructor in psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. And he's also medical director for McLean Southeast Adult Psychiatric Program, also in Boston. Jeff has written this extraordinary book, Cured, which I believe is published in the UK today. And it really is an excellent examination of the mind-body connection. It's a book that Jeff began researching about 15 years ago. It's exceptionally well researched. He's traveled the world in really looking into these instances of spontaneous recovery and healing. As I mentioned, he's a medical doctor, he's a psychiatrist, and he also has a master's in divinity from Princeton. Incredible academic credentials. So I was really interested to find, as I read the book, how nervous he was about presenting this incredible piece of work to the world. So my first question was to really ask you why, with all these incredible credentials, why were you nervous about it, Jeff?
Well, I think other people might see the credentials, but I see me, and I'm just a person like everybody else. I think all of our degrees and affiliations are just masks that we wear. Underneath we're all just people. So I was
Okay.
nervous.
Okay. So you were writing this as a person, as someone who's drawing on their background, which was quite a unusual background. You've got a grew up in an Amish community. You have a degree in divinity. You broke with the traditions of your society and became a medical doctor, and then went into psychiatry. So you think it was, despite all of those things that you had achieved, you were actually putting this book out there as what you thought as a combination of all of that.
Yes, I mean this cured has been a very personal journey for me to answer deeply burning questions, and so it's had a profound influence on me. Both this research has had a profound influence on me both personally and professionally.
Okay, I mean, you make it really clear in the book that you would never write something unless you absolutely had to. What was the burning question that really drove you to write this?
Well, I really wanted to know what was true. And 17 years ago, I got drug into this research rather reluctantly and skeptically initially. And I wasn't sure what my colleagues would think. And so I was a new young medical director and faculty member at Harvard at the time. And an oncology nurse at Mass General Hospital in Boston came to me and said that she had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and told that she had a number of months to live. She asked for my help in telling this to her son. And that was, of course, a very difficult conversation. Then she went to a healing center and began calling me saying that she was seeing some amazing recoveries and hoped I would look into it. I said no.
In 2003, very short book then.
Right. That was 2000. Yeah, that was 2002 when all this started. And I didn't think anything real was likely to be going on. But Nikki was stubborn and persistent. She began having other people call me from around the country and elsewhere saying that they had medical evidence for their recoveries and did I want to hear their stories. And they began to send me files and records and long writings about their story. And eventually I began to look at them enough to realize that something was going on that I couldn't explain. And the long and short of it is I did end up doing some research in the area. And that was a long time ago. We've come a long way since then.
And you say, you know, you're in Harvard Medical Center. It sounds like a good place to begin to look into these unusual medical cases. So, how did you end up in Brazil? What took you to
So
Brazil?
yeah, so Nikki was one of the places she was calling me from was Brazil originally, and and so a number of the people that she had contact me also were from Brazil. So in 2003, I did go to Brazil, and I had three strict criteria for the research. I told people that I a genuinely incurable illness, according to all that we currently understand in medicine. And that
Can
was
you
the
say that
first criteria.
again? Say that first one again, please.
The first criteria for my research was the person had to have a genuinely incurable illness, according to all that we currently understand in medicine. The
Yeah.
second criteria was the person had to have indisputably clear medical evidence that their diagnosis had been accurate, and they needed to have clear, also indisputable evidence for recovery or for having a dramatic improvement in their disease course that couldn't be explained according to our current understanding. The third criteria was the person needed to not have taken an experimental medication or anything else that could potentially explain how they got better. So I needed really clean cases before I was willing to look at that. And most of the cases, of course, most of the people who came to me didn't have that kind of, they didn't fit those criteria. So there's a lot of stories I couldn't look at, but there were some that did. And that's what really began this journey.
Okay. And it's interesting. You're saying that those are the criteria that you were looking for. So, were you all when you've been persuaded by Nikki to look into this? Was there
Yeah.
something in you that made you think that that there was something beyond the medical diagnosis that you were looking for?
Well, let's see if this answers your question. I think I did live with some internal question that helped drive some of this. Coming from an Amish community when I was young, I was raised in a very different culture. And, we didn't have ready access to things like radio or TV or even store-bought clothes. Some of the great things about it, my parents grew the wheat that they then used stone grinder to create the bread that we use, the pancakes, the muffins, all that sort of thing. But it's a very different world. And so in my journey through that, and then to college, and then to seminary, and then to medical school, I had gone through a lot of changes myself in my own beliefs, and had come to believe that science is a fabulous tool, a great instrument for discerning knowledge. But I still had a lot of questions about what's true and how do you know what's true. So those questions certainly were important in the quest to understand what was going on here.
And I think you say that um, early on in your research as well, that it was, there was this idea to understand, and it was so useful to read as a general reader, that there was so much to learn from these situations in how to live a vital, healthy, and
Yeah.
miraculous life, almost as a general life. And there was this sense that we perhaps have forgotten what we knew. And part of this
Yes.
journey was you wanted to perhaps uncover more about the mind-body connection in terms of how illness manifests itself than perhaps we realized we knew.
That's absolutely true. Over time, I began to realize that there is a really big difference between what I was encouraging my patients to do and what, as a doctor, I had been encouraged to do in my process of helping patients, both in a psychiatric hospital and in a medical hospital. And that was all very different from what I was seeing these people with such remarkable recoveries do. It wasn't the doctors and the medications that were getting them better, and they were doing things really differently. And that contrast began to really sit in my mind. I'm, as you said, a medical director at a psychiatric hospital. I'm also the chief of behavioral medicine at a medical hospital. And so I see every day what we do as doctors with our patients. And it just began to be a significant contrast to see what these people with remarkable recoveries were doing.
Yeah, I think you say in the book that, when you're taught as a medical doctor, you see the body in parts.
That's right.
Almost.
Yeah, yes, that's really true. And that's what we do. In medicine, we specialize in body parts. If you want to be a cardiologist, you study the heart. If you want to be a they have more fundamentally a chronic inflammation problem. And so it's a big question about what it means to decrease the inflammation in your body. When your body becomes inflamed, it's just a matter of time until one of those body parts breaks down with some kind of illness, whether it's heart disease or something else. And there's another piece of this that's really important too, in terms of how, as doctors, we're a minister or imam. And all of these experts have really helpful information for you. But if they just talk from within the blinders of their specialty, they're not going to be giving you, as experts, the really essential pieces of what you need to heal at a deeper level. Because the people that I've studied, they took all of their psychological, spiritual, and physical aspects and integrated that in a new way and into a new life in a way that was really important. And standing back and seeing the forest for the trees was such a critical piece of that. So we need to encourage our specialists, our experts in each field, to do their piece, but to also stand back and see the big picture. And we need to encourage people who go see the experts to look at their life and see the big picture and all the ways in which these different aspects combine for their own unique lived life.
It's really interesting. And just to make sure I've understood properly, when you're saying you're not seeing the forest for the trees, is this your idea that kind of all of the medical step forwards we've made over the last couple of 100 years have been about separating the mind from the body? And that we've almost ended up with a medicine that can't quite see the two together.
Yes. Now, what's exciting is that things are rapidly changing, and we are entering a new era where steps are being built in research from the side of the body and from the side of the mind towards each other every day. And so thousands of studies are accumulating now to show that the mind and the body are intricately linked, that we have spirits that emanate our lives and give us life, and that's important, that our contact with that part of us is really important. But in the clinics, we are still taught to separate that. And there's a lot of structures in medicine and psychiatry that keep those two worlds apart in a way that I think limits our ability to really help people fully and for people to see the possibilities in their lives.
Okay. Well, let's see how we can get there. So let's talk a little bit more about the healing centres, which is where you did some of your original research in the mid 2000s with people who had these spectacular recoveries that had been, told that they were at the end of the line in terms of medicine in North America.
Right.
So you had made it very clear that with your 3 criteria that they were going to be people that really were beyond the reaches of medicine. And you talk about people flying down to Brazil, not unable to get on the flight on their own, really with days to live in one case. Mm-hmm. What happened in these healing centres in Brazil? What did you find with the spontaneous recovery?
Well, I think I write about these 4 pillars of healing and well-being, and it's a long story to unpack all of that.
I know.
But
I'm sorry.
The first thing, oh no, that's great. It's a really important question. The first pillar that I noticed is that these healing centers, and even when people didn't go to healing centers, when they were doing this on their own, whether in Europe or the United States or somewhere else, doing this healing work. Because some of the people I studied went to healing centers and some did not. And some people did this on their own, and others did this more in a group effort at these healing centers. one of the first things I noticed, and one of the first things that I was able to get my mind around, was how different their nutrition was from what I was eating and what a lot of us eat by and large. And even though I saw a lot of dietary changes that looked different on the surface, underneath they were actually much more common and much more similar than they first appeared. So what I noticed was that people, when they were getting these diagnoses, they were making big changes in their nutrition, and they were often eliminating processed foods, sugars, and refined flours from their diets. Some people went vegetarian and did not eat meat. Some people ate a lot of meat, but the underlying commonality really was about getting rid of the processed foods, the sugars, and the refined flours. Those who ate meat tended to eat meat that was with animals that were happy when they were alive, not flooded with stress hormones, grass fed so that they were getting the healthier kind of fats, and not pumped full of chemicals.
And it really, you saw that changing nutrition drastically. And I think,
Yeah,
in some cases in Brazil, you were saying it was, it was quite natural in a way because the food that was served was, very vegetable heavy, lots of different vegetables, very few sugars, refined carbs, no alcohol, coffee, etc.
right.
But so it was quite a natural change rather than a deliberate change, although some other people did do it deliberately. But really making that nutrition, you think nutritional change really was really a factor in spontaneous remission of symptoms and illness.
That's right. It was a big factor.
It's incredible. And do you think, and you talk a lot in the book about eating a diet that's nutritionally dense. And I think as well as the case studies of people who have had spontaneous recovery, there is also a lot of advice for people who are trying to live their most vital life for as long as they can. And
That's right.
what is your advice nutritionally for people who are listening with that in mind?
Yeah. So what I learned is it's not about following a fad diet. It's not about counting calories. It's not about making sure there's certain portions of food on your plate, as much as really making sure that the foods you put in your body are nutritionally dense. And and that means a lot of fruits and vegetables, honestly. Um, Again, some meat is fine, and some people, I told some stories purposefully in Cured about people who really went with more of a ketosis diet, but they really didn't put the foods with the empty calories in their bodies. They weren't putting the food that has a lot of chemicals in their bodies, and so that was a really big difference. And it forced me to reevaluate what I was putting into my body. I had no idea when all of this started that I was addicted to sugar, for example.
Hmm.
There's research that says that 100 plus years ago, the average person ate 4 pounds of sugar a year, no big deal. But now we eat more like 152 pounds of sugar a year on average, and our bodies are just not equipped for that. A lot of the foods that we do eat have a lot of hidden sugars in them, whether it's corn syrup and that sort of thing. And I was shocked that I was addicted, and I was shocked that what I thought was hunger was actually addiction. And now I just don't have the same kind of hunger that I used to have. And I lost 37 pounds just by changing the way I ate, and my numbers normalized. One of the things I've learned along the way is that as a doctor, I now ask questions about what people eat. I thought I ate healthy
Mm.
years ago, and most people think they eat healthy. And the truth is, we don't. I just never really took into account all the donuts and the brownies and the pizza that I was picking up in the nurse's station, and didn't really count that very much, I don't think so.
It's easily done. I think, a lot of people who will be listening, take food very seriously. And I think will follow a nutritionally dense diet, which is great. It's good for them.
Mm,
And, it's very admirable for us to try. But this is a very complicated issue, nutrition, though, because,
yeah,
I noticed that, there is also huge benefits to eating together. And there is a
yeah,
danger of nutrition becoming to the point at which you're using benefits. I mean, I think you talk about diets where people eat appallingly, but the ties are so strong and the
Right.
communities are so strong that the benefits outweigh the diet. So it's complex. It's not as
It is.
easy as eating the right food on your own, not
Yeah.
going anywhere, not seeing people.
Absolutely true, because ultimately you want to the changes I encourage people to make, I want them to make those changes from a place of seeing an opportunity rather than it feeling like another burden imposed on them. A person who's ill does not need another burden imposed on them. And food is also about love. It's about connection. It's about sharing and communication, and it's all these things. And so every person needs to find the path that's right for them, because food is more than just food. It's also about nurturing other parts of ourselves through our connection with others. So that's why the people I spoke with, it was not a one size fits all diet. They had to find a unique prescription for them that felt life giving, that helped their body feel better, and that worked in their unique set of circumstances.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That chimes with a lot of things we've been dealing with, we're talking about at Salon, that idea of it's finding your own way. It's
Yes,
not grabbing hold of one thing or one piece of advice. It's finding the way that's right for you.
that's right. And really finding a way to trust and recognize your own intuitive sense about what's right for you is important. We all have different ancestries. We all come from different parts of the world with different kinds of diets that have been cultivated in our microbiome for generations. And so to be respectful of that and to find the right path for us, it takes really looking at our own individual lives very closely.
Okay. All right. So that's nutrition. So our one pillar. Quite an easy
That's,
one to start with. Yeah. Are we
that's
gonna
great.
yeah. Are we gonna move on to stress? It's a popular subject for us. Can
Yes.
you tell us about
Stress
the
is a
role
big
that
topic these days with the coronavirus and all that sort of thing, and people are more isolated at homes. Now, we have to understand that we have to heal our stress response. That's absolutely one of the pillars. But it's also important to understand that not all stress is bad. We all need challenge stress to help us grow and learn. Running a marathon in London can be a great example of challenge stress if it helps you reach your higher self and expand your understanding of what you're capable of. But if you are in a toxic relationship or in a work environment that causes you to leave depleted at the end of each day, questioning your value and worth, then something needs to change, because you're going to be in chronic fight, flight, or freeze, and you're not going to be able to heal properly. It's a really different physiology if you are in fight, freeze, and very anxious than if you are in a more relaxed state where you are connected with and able to laugh and feel gratitude and love for the people in your life. It's a very different physiology.
yeah, I want to just pull that apart a little bit more because I think the North America is a bit ahead of us on this with stress. And I really love this for you. Again, it's like finding your own way for you, that knife edge between challenge stress, because you should be getting the most that you possibly can out of your own
Right,
ability, but
right.
without tipping over into toxic stress. Is that where we need to be?
Yeah, and so for different people, that will be a different decision,
Of
because
course.
if you are in a toxic stress situation, then you need to either change your relationship with that environment or you need to leave that environment. And so different people that I have studied made different decisions. Some people had to leave toxic relationships or toxic jobs. Other people changed their relationship with that relationship or job in a way that they were able to stay, but they had to set different boundaries. They had to find a path that was affirming of the other person, but also affirming of them.
Okay, because the situation's not going to change. You're going to break.
Right. There are some stresses that you don't want to change. I mean, a mother taking care of her baby, she'll be up at 2 a.m., and that's very stressful when she's only getting 3 hours of sleep a night. But that's also a wonderful thing. And so we need to find a unique path for each life.
Yeah, okay. You talk about really needing to feel our way towards relaxation, and to really, no matter what stress we're under, challenge stress, toxic stress, wherever we are on our stress journey, we absolutely need to be able to relax and recover. And again, that's something that we've been playing around with again this year. So it's great to read it from a medical point of view, psychiatric point of view. Is this right, that we need to find time in our life to
Yeah.
recover? It's
Yes.
not adding
It's,
more
yeah,
stress on top of stress. It's not a
that's
marathon
right.
on top of a huge job, on top of a difficult relationship.
That's right. As my friend Gabor Mate says in British Columbia, he says, if you don't know how to say no, your body will eventually say no for you. He's a physician that sees a lot of people in both family practice and in addiction historically over the years. And I
I know
think it's
Gaber.
just a really pithy way of saying, if you don't know how to say no, your body will eventually say no for you. You will become ill, either physically or emotionally. And so knowing how to set those boundaries so that you create and build in well-being for your life, build in the things that help you come alive, those are really critical things to do for every one of us.
I can't believe how many times you talk about meditation, because there's a third member of Salon, Juliet, who's not here tonight, and she's a meditator. She's done it for 10 years. Very calm all the time. Every
There you go.
neuroscientist I know says meditation, it's the thing, your brain loves it. But do you do it, Jeff? Do you do
I
it?
do some. I'm more of a contemplative. I journal, I read, I try to think deeply, I try to consciously relax, I try to consciously connect with my life and with people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in more recent times, I've been experimenting with meditation more on my own, but historically, I've been more of a journaler and a contemplative. And there's strengths and weaknesses to both approaches, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think trying the thing that works for you, and there's different kinds of meditation too. So we all need to find what really helps us get connected with ourselves at a deeper level.
Yeah, it's that personal prescription again, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what comes through the book quite a lot is love, and
Mm.
and in lots of different ways. You talk about one person who has an incredible recovery, and one of the things he attributes it to is this absolute belief that he is really loved by his
Yeah.
great grandmother, and
Right.
the power of that is so powerful for him. But I wanted to talk about the parasympathetic system, and
Yes.
how these very small connections during our day can give us a sense of being loved, and how and why are these so important to our health?
Yeah. That's such a great question because I think too many of us live in chronic fight, flight, or freeze too much of the time. And so that means our bodies are secreting the stress hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline. And as those stress hormones bathe our immune system and bathe our cells, it actually makes those cells go numb and makes them sluggish. And so our immune systems and our bodies don't respond as crisply and efficiently as they need. The the sympathetic response, the fight or flight and freeze, is really important. If you got a tiger staring you down, you want to not be talking. You want to be hightailing it to the nearest tree, and you want to be very fast and efficient in that way. But after that scary event is over, you want to relax and turn that response off so that your body can go into parasympathetic healing mode. And that's rest and repair. And that's a very different physiology. Instead of the stress hormones like cortisol or norepinephrine, you are secreting oxytocin, which is the bonding molecule. That's what helps us bond with each other. Serotonin is the molecule that decreases anxiety and depression. Dopamine is the pleasure pathway. These are examples of neurochemicals that not only relax us, but also connect us and connect us to each other, to ourselves, and they release a physiology of love that is healing and really important for the body. to heal. And it's great for our immune systems.
It is, but you talk about the fact that our definition of love is perhaps too narrow because we're
Yes.
so fixated in society of finding the big romantic love, or the
Right.
perfect relationship with our parents or perfect relationship with our children, that we're missing out on these incredible opportunities for small bumps of love
Yes.
throughout the day, which can be very small interactions with people. And if we show sort of moments of love to strangers, to friends, in these small interactions, we get all the benefits of being loved. Is this right?
Oh, absolutely true. And so we can get a great physiological response that is very healing for our bodies when we see the postman and just have a brief 10 or 20-second conversation that's genuinely connecting. When we smile, when our eyes connect, when we just try to be authentic and genuine and be ourselves, whether it's somebody we meet on the street, a woman pushing the baby carriage, and just talk to them and laugh about the baby for a few seconds. Those kinds of things light up our physiology and give us a really different physiology than the physiology of fight or flight with the stress hormones. Our bodies need that. It makes our immune cells work crisply and efficiently. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, and this is within our grasp. This
Yes.
is even now, on lockdown, as humans, which you cleverly say, if we're putting us in a zoo, you would say, do not put in isolation. Here we all are, almost in isolation. You're saying just take any opportunity in your day to have this sort of meaningful, almost like turn it into kind of like a connection that can help your immune system, help your health.
Yes.
Yeah, I love
Yes.
it.
That's right. We want to get out of the physiology of fear and into the physiology of connection and healing. And that is great for the immune system and great for our bodies and
And is
great
that
for our souls.
And yeah. And is that what you mean about, looking to our emotional nutrition and kind of like
Yes.
taking responsibility for getting
Mm.
these positive emotions into our life where we can?
Yes. It's not just about the nutrition we put into our bodies via food, it's also about the emotional nutrition we give ourselves. We know on the basis of great research, such as what Barbara Fredrickson is doing at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, she's showing the profound physiology of these connections that we make with each other, whether they're just someone we don't know very well or someone we do know very well.
Okay. Okay. So I did ask you, just before we started, we talked about some of your findings. Why do we need to start looking at the mind and body as one again? And the second part of your book really starts to look at the place that beliefs can play
Yeah.
in our health. And you talk a lot about the idea of the authentic self, that there is an idea of yourself that you almost have to be.
Mm. You know, what's astonishing to me is how often people have said to me that when they first got their diagnosis of a deadly disease, whether it was cancer or something else, that it's so fascinating how often the person experienced that at one level as devastating, but at another level as a relief. And so people have said to me, it's like, oh, so I have a year to live. I don't have to be what my mother or father want me to be. I don't have to go to med school if that's not what I want to do. Or I can be, if I have only a year to live, then that gives me permission to be who I want to be now and to focus on the things that really matter to me. One of the most common things that people have said to me over the years is that it took an illness for them to wake up and realize that they needed to stop taking care of everyone else. They needed to stop responding to the perceived expectations of others and instead focus on what was life-giving for them, what created life and vitality within them, what created an understanding of their value and their purpose. And that liberation from a life of living for the expectations of others has been hugely transformative and liberating for many of the people I've studied. It's been a real lesson to me.
But Jeff, that just sounds really strange. It sounds
Yeah,
almost unmedical. That you're saying to me that, people have got illnesses which is going to kill them. And,
right,
and you are seeing people who have made significant changes away from the life they were living to the life their authentic life, their authentic self.
right.
And this has an effect on their disease.
Yeah. This is a really big topic, and it needs a lot more research for sure. I think what's true is when a person makes really deep changes in their understanding of themselves and the universe, when you make those kinds of changes, you can end up with a different physiology, and that's measurable. And what's interesting is that sometimes you end up with a physiology that is less hospitable to disease. I think what's true is a lot of the people that I studied, I can say it like this, they ask questions. What does this illness mean for me? Is this illness a message? Is there something that's out of balance, out of harmony in my life? And is this illness a message about that? And that's a really interesting question to ask. I think what's true is that many of us, we grow up with these beliefs about ourselves, about our value, about whether we're good enough. We inherit these beliefs from our parents, from the ways in which we interpret different traumas we go through, from kids on the playground. We pick these up from employers, from colleagues. And what's true, a lot of these beliefs are unexamined. Some are true, some are false, some are consciously true, and some are unconsciously, we're not even aware that we believe. And I think when we begin to take a closer look at these beliefs and discard beliefs that aren't supporting us in the life that we believe is our life to live, and it's sometimes really astonishing what becomes possible.
I think that's really interesting that when you're talking about medical advice, you're saying it generally is given when you have a disease as cautiously in the middle. You've got between this and this amount of time, you've got symptoms like this,
Yeah,
this is the disease.
right,
And you were saying that, people internalize what they are told. Whereas in some cases with people you are writing about, they don't want to know any of the chances. They don't
right,
want to be given any of the information because it's with them, and they want to be not in the middle. They want to try to be an outlier, or they
right,
want to fail trying.
right. And I think that, I think as doctors, we're taught to give a person an idea of what their trajectory might be, what their prognosis is. And I just had a number of people who said, especially I tell the story of Juniper in the book, she said, I accept the diagnosis, but I don't accept the prognosis. And she was in love with her husband. She wanted to have children. She wanted to have a full, vital life. She was very young. And so she wanted to find a path for her. And she didn't want to be just a statistic. And so she looked at her life very carefully. She was very sober about analyzing what she could change. And, I think what we don't do in many of our scientific studies, we don't study the outliers. We study and group things around the mean, around the average. And it's absolutely true. If I was ill, I would want to know what the average person does. But if I was ill, I would also want to know what the ultimate achievers in health do. I'd want to know what the outliers do, because it turns out they're doing things differently. And I think it's just like in sports, we study ultimate achievement in health, and in business, we study ultimate achievement. We also can benefit from studying ultimate achievement in health and not just dismissing it.
It's really interesting. Who, and you talk about placebos in the book quite a lot. And is that
Right.
because you really want to use that a way of us understanding just how beliefs can really affect our health? Because obviously it's quite a
Yeah.
difficult area for people to understand, because medical seems so scientific and ideas seems so unscientific. And
Right.
and today's miracles could be the science of tomorrow, but we don't tend to think about medical process like that. So was that deliberate to use placebos as a way of just saying, we know they work, they don't
Yeah,
cure, but they can care for us?
yeah. Every scientific study has to build, I mean, the way most scientific studies are designed is to build in a placebo group because the beliefs are so powerful that many people will get better or will get partially better just with taking a pill that we know has no medicine in it. It's just a sugar pill. And even if studies even show, even if a person knows it's a placebo, they know there's no medicine in it, many of those people still get better. And so belief is a big deal. And we don't know how to wade into that very easily because there's been this split between mind and body for so long. But we use words like we have to build placebo into every scientific trial that we do along those lines. From my perspective, words like spontaneous remission, miracle, spiritual healing, placebo, these are all black boxes that we've not really unpacked with the tools of science. We just know that belief is a big deal, and it's such a big deal, we build it into our studies, but we don't know what to do with it. And so we have to begin unpacking that.
Yeah. I've got a couple more questions, but I'm just going to see if there are questions for you. And I'm sorry for a moment, it's quite hard
That's
to
great.
do. Okay, so.
Do you want one from online?
Yes, please.
Okay. Jeff, I don't know if you can hear me. I've got a question here. What's your opinion on the potential spiritual and healing properties of ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, and other psychedelic drugs?
So the question, if I heard it, was what do I think about ayahuasca and some of these other related hallucinogenic
Psychotropics, yeah.
medications and substances? I think that we need more research. The initial results are that these look really promising. I think it's not just about the medication or the substance. The setting within which these events occur, the context and the purpose, the intention with which they're used is really critical. If a person is just trying to get high, that's one thing, and that's very different from a person who is trying to resolve a crisis in their lives and take their life to a whole new level and has a trained psychotherapist or doctor who is taking them through that process and spends time with them, integrating the new insights into their lives. The results for healing trauma are very intriguing and certainly demand more research. It looks like people can heal trauma in some cases in a way that they couldn't access through just talking in psychotherapy. We all know in psychiatry that people can use psychiatry or talking about their problems as a way to actually not deal with them. And this helps cut through some of that.
Oh, it's really interesting. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, what has been the medical establishment's response to your findings? And again, that you've obviously researched it over 50 years, with a medical background. You've discounted a huge number of people who didn't fit your criteria. Your results are for people who have had miraculous, spontaneous recovery and healing. So you've put
So far I've been so grateful for the responses. They've been very positive, overwhelmingly so far. I don't think that they will continue to be positive all the time. I think what I know is that doctors and patients are desperate for an approach that is more person-centered and more rooted in what's right with people rather than exclusively disease-centered or based on what's wrong with a person. And I think that that desire for a new and improved way to understand what's going on in people's lives, so far it's being met very positively. I think we'll see how this unfolds as it continues to go out into the culture. But I think what's true is the timing is good, because I think so many doctors and patients and healthcare providers are so burdened by the system as it currently is, and feel like people aren't getting all that they need and deserve to heal at a deep level. And so hopefully this can be one part of giving people more what they need and deserve.
Yeah, and you mentioned that work that's going on alongside the research that you've done that's really interesting. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. I was thinking particularly of this Cunningham's work and findings, which is, you write about, which is so fascinating.
Yes, Alistair Cunningham did some brilliant research, and I think there's a couple of reasons why his work is so important. He spanned this divide of mind and body, and has been doing that for many years. So he is a psychologist that ran a breast cancer clinic or a cancer clinic for decades. And so for decades, he was stepping across those boundaries in Toronto, Canada, at University of Toronto, and seeing the ways in which mind affects body and body affects mind. And there's another level at which I think is important to understand. He also was a cancer survivor himself. And so he had not only a professional interest, but also a personal interest driving his effort to construct really well-designed studies. And his studies were small but exquisitely designed, with great perception of the issues that are relevant and important. And he's emeritus now. He's retired, but his research is a good starting place for us as we think about more studies that try to wade into these really complicated but important issues.
Can you just explain a bit about what he found?
Yeah, so he did some very carefully designed studies. At one point, he was spending over 100 hours with each cancer patient in an effort to gather not only all of the quantitative data, the lab tests, and making sure that we knew exactly what kind of cancer they had and the severity they had, but he was also going deep into their lives through qualitative methods with reviewers who were going over his results very carefully, looking to keep everything as objective as possible. And he was able to, and there are small studies that need to be replicated,
Of course,
but
yeah.
he was able to distinguish that the people who were lasting much longer and sometimes going into remission were simply doing things quite a bit differently from those who weren't. And these are things that had never been really looked at before. So I think it's important research.
Okay, and these were, for a layperson, these were things that related to the involvement in your treatment.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things he noticed was that people who lasted longer and lived longer, and in a few cases went into spontaneous remission, they really took charge of their health. They were very involved. They had a strong will to live. They took responsibility for figuring out different things to try for themselves. They went beyond just taking the doctor's recommended treatments. They went beyond just taking the prescribed medication. They were looking for what more they could do. People would say things like, well, I'm not going to die until I see my daughter walk down the aisle when she gets married, or I'm not going to die until I see my son graduate from high school. There were real commitments there that really reflected, I think, a real deep desire to take charge of their health and have some say in what was happening to them.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting, we've only obviously talked about it very briefly, but it's a very interesting chapter to read about what were those factors that came into play that really drove people through their treatment. It was really fascinating.
Right.
I've got a question from Justin. I'm going to read to you. So he says, fascinating. Thank you. I think that's for you, the fascinating. He says, you discuss healing incurable physiological illness through your 4 pillars. you are in a sense perpetuating the division between mind and body. What are your thoughts on healing incurable mental health issues?
That's a great question. We actually here at McLean, we've had some clear cases of spontaneous healing of psychiatric illness as well. I didn't tell those stories in the book because they don't have the kind of medical evidence that I needed in the early years, especially. But there's a woman here whose story I tell. She's a really good example of this. Had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder for years and had been so chronically suicidal that she was um, receiving at one point, I believe, 2 visits a day from the Department of Mental Health because they were just so worried about her, and had lived for years with such severe depression and suicidality. She came to our program. She said that she found hope here, and then she left our program and went back to her art, which she had not touched in years. And she said her art basically healed her. She um, now has started a program that for years I have given the keynote address every year. She fills a hotel ballroom every year with this peer-to-peer program where she helps people help each other and help each other recover from mental illness. And what she does, it's called Dancing in the Rain. Her name is Mary Munsell. It's out on Cape Cod. And she's an amazing lady. And for years, she has sent me um, emails and newsletters of what she's doing, uh, newspaper articles when she spoke in front of the House of Representatives in Massachusetts, and just the amazing work that she does. She's a great example of somebody who has a really different life now, and we've seen this kind of thing before. So it's the kind of thing I hope to write more about.
Next book,
Next
Jeff.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question here. Do you think healing should be prescribed? Should the patient be allowed days off to digest the process and to heal with support instead of fitting it into daily life?
Instead of, what's the last part? Instead of what?
Sort of fitting it around daily life, fitting it into daily life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what you want is to prescribe things that help a person create well-being and authenticity in their lives, where they are living their life. And it's not just about the medication. It's not just about these other things. People do often have to make big changes in their lives, and it's dying to an old way of living a lot of times that they know has been wrong for them at some level or unhealthy for them. That takes a lot of courage. It's sometimes very messy to make those kinds of changes in your life. And I know how I am, and I've watched many of these people, how afraid they were, how afraid I've been to make big changes in our lives. It's hard to do so because we get into patterns and habits, and we have relationships that are used to us being a certain kind of person. Sometimes all that needs to change.
Yeah, I will come back to that. But I wanted to ask a question from Andrew. I think I know which Andrew this is. Hello, Andrew. And he says, Jeff, could a deliberately positive, encouraging presentation of adverse diagnosis improve outcomes? That is there an underlying nocebo effect caused by standard diagnosis delivery? He's very smart,
question.
Andrew. He's very smart.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, probably so. I don't know what the best answer to give on that is. I think that how we present things, there's some research that's very clear that how the doctor presents things is really important for the perception the person has of their illness, for the interpretation they make of that. And it's so important. It's a really good question. It's so important how we present illness to a person. And we don't, whatever we do, we want to make sure they experience it as not yet another burden. Whatever decisions a person decides to make, it needs to be an opportunity for them and something that's liberating for them. Those can be very different pathways for two different people, but it needs to not be a burden. They can't take chemotherapy just because their doctor and their husband's telling them they need to. And they need to do that because they see that as an opportunity and as their best chance for getting better.
Yeah, and yes, and you even talk about sometimes in some cases families not not telling the person what the diagnosis is because they know their outcome will be better if they don't know.
Yeah, and I think in the United States, we typically tell people, and we believe that information is the right thing to do.
Right.
So I purposefully did tell a story about this was an NPR story, actually, a woman in whose family came from China, and they didn't tell. In China, it's a different way of doing things that's changing slowly, but the family sometimes is told about the diagnosis instead of the patient, and then the family will then tell the patient, or they'll decide whether to tell the patient. And they believed, on the basis of knowing their grandmother, that if she knew that she had 3 months to live because of her cancer, that she would probably become very afraid and die. And they knew her very well. And so they didn't tell her, and the years just continued to go by. Now, as a doctor and someone who lives in the era and the context I live in, I do believe that information is good, but I do think that the point made just a few minutes ago by Alexander, I think,
Yeah, and
about
Andrew.
about how we present that is critical.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jeff. One question that I think everyone will know I have to ask is from Pascal. And she says, Jeff, and I've been thinking this all day, so thank you, Pascal. Did you encounter any facts that pets could help with the process of healing in any cases?
Yeah.
Jeff is nodding.
Yes, animals, pets are a huge deal. What's true is, I think animals, they don't judge. And so many times, I think all of us benefit physiologically and psychologically from unconditional love and compassion. And
even if it's just projection.
Yes. Yep. And animals, they just love you. They just want to know they're going to get their food, and they just want to be with you. And that's very healing, especially for people who've been through a lot of trauma from human relationships. Animals can feel initially like a much safer place to be. And so, yes, animals, we've had animals on our units here at McLean in the past, because we know from the research that animals have a really healing presence, and especially for people who've been through trauma.
Okay. I've got one more question, then I want to ask you a closing question to bring our session to an end. I have a question here. I don't know the name, sorry. But the question is, do you think pain, either emotional or physical, can act as a time traveler, and these illnesses could turn up to make us stop and force us to heal through awareness of conditions or symptoms that are actually pain?
Yeah, I think pain, when we understand that there's a reason for it, and that when we can let ourselves see it as potentially an opportunity. As a doctor, I'm trained to medicate pain and to eliminate pain. But and it's absolutely the right thing to do sometimes, but sometimes it's important to just ask, why is this pain here? Whether it's physical pain or psychological pain, is there something in my life that needs attention? And when we can do that deeper questioning, sometimes we end up treating things at the source, and we eliminate the cause of the pain instead of just medicating the pain and treating the symptoms. And that can be really liberating. And that is the kind of thing that gives a person a dramatically improved life and quality of life.
Thank you for the question. The last question I wanted to ask you was, we've spoken about this a couple of times during the hour that we've all been together, and there's this idea that if you find yourself having to make dramatic changes to the way that you live your life through all the elements of your life, you have some pretty fundamental advice about how to do this, don't you? And
Yeah.
it's I just wondered if you could help us understand if anyone we know is going through this, or is anyone looking at really making changes. What is your advice to change the way that you live?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is to be gentle with yourself, to make changes from a place of what feels liberating and empowering to you. Don't ever make changes as much as you can from a place of you should do this. Um, don't do it from a place of fear any more than you can. I mean, I think realistically it's more complicated than that. I remember I tell the story, for example, of Claire in the book, who she found out that salt is really bad for the pancreas, and she had pancreatic cancer. And so she said, "You wouldn't believe how fast I got salt out of my house," for example. And so, yes, that was fear, but she also was also doing the work to really ask deeper questions about the kind of life she wanted to have. She expected to die. And so she had a matter of months left, and she wanted to finish as well as she could. And she wanted to heal the relationships where there'd been conflicts or hurt. And she wanted to forgive where forgiveness was needed. And it was in that quest to make those kinds of changes. And she was gentle with herself at times, and other times it was very rapid. She just cleaned out the pantry on some things. And so I think that's very much the way all of us do these things. Some of us, we can make some changes, really big changes quickly, and other things we do more gradually. We introduce new foods more gradually, or we will go through a process of learning how to forgive others or ourselves, and learn how to treat ourselves with compassion rather than judgment.
And burn the boats.
And burn the boats. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I do tell the story about how Cortez did was in a fight against a much bigger army. They had a small army that was fighting a very large army, and there was a lot at stake. And so they landed on the shore of the island, and then he burned the boats and said, "You need to go forward, and you either will die or you will win." And that gave them a resolve to actually dig deeper into themselves and not make their battle from a place of knowing they could always run back to the boats. They didn't have that option anymore. And so burning your boats is that analogy where sometimes I tell this to people who are struggling with some of the diseases that come to me. An addiction is a good example. If a person is really wanting to give up cigarettes or really wanting to give up alcohol or a different drug, sometimes what they need to do is to really burn that boat. They need to close the door in the back of their mind that they always leave cracked, that they will stop drinking, for example, but they always know when the stress gets high, oh, I'll just drink tonight, or I'll just have a couple of cigarettes tonight, and then I'll go back to not doing that tomorrow morning. Typically, it's a trick that their mind plays on them, and they actually relapse completely, and then 3 months later they're back in my office again. And so burning the boat is definitely a thing that is something we have to learn how to make decisions that we really mean and do, and know how to strengthen the muscles on that so that we get better at it.
We leave no possibility in the mind that we're not going to do it.
That's right. And then what's fascinating is that changes the psychology of it in a way that sometimes when they make that shift so completely, they don't even crave the cigarettes anymore, or they don't crave the alcohol any longer. It can be a really profound shift. Sometimes it takes a lot of willpower initially, but when you make such a profound commitment that you know that even if it kills you, you're not going to go back through that door again and pick up that cigarette or that alcohol, that shifts something because you've removed it psychologically from your life, and it makes it a lot easier.
Jeff, I feel that we've barely scratched the surface of your work. Thank you so much for talking to us on your publication day in the UK. And I just want to say thank you so much from all of us at Salon London. It's been an incredible interaction that's helped our immune system no end to hear about your work. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you in London very soon. From all of us at Salon London, thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you for having me here. I hope to be in London soon. It's a beautiful city.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on our first ever live
podcast,
event
right.
with an author. It's been great fun. Thank you for your amazing questions. Thank you, Pascal, Andrew, Justin, and everyone. See you soon. This salon is now closed. Thank you.